In the late autumn of 1957, the quiet farming community of Plainfield, Wisconsin, was shaken by a discovery that would forever alter its sense of safety. Ed Gein, a soft-spoken handyman known for odd jobs and his reclusive habits, had long been an unremarkable presence in town, polite if distant. When a local hardware store owner vanished without explanation, neighbors first suspected a robbery gone wrong. But as darkness fell and the store remained locked, unease spread through the small downtown streets. The air that night carried the brittle chill of approaching winter, the kind that amplifies every sound. The sheriff's office, accustomed to livestock disputes and minor thefts, suddenly faced the possibility of something far more serious. By morning, search parties were combing the frozen fields, their flashlights sweeping over the bare trees and the quiet farmhouses that dotted the horizon. No one yet imagined that behind one of those farmhouse doors lay the evidence of a mind profoundly detached from ordinary human boundaries. The story that would unfold in the coming days would test the limits of understanding and of the investigators themselves. When deputies arrived at the isolated Gein property, they found the yard silent except for the creak of an unlatched barn door swaying in the wind. The farmhouse looked neglected, its windows clouded with grime, curtains drawn tight. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint odor of decay. Officers moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting narrow paths through the gloom. What they uncovered inside defied their expectations. The rooms were cluttered with newspapers, tools, and objects that seemed to have been altered or repurposed in disturbing ways, though the full extent of what they found would only later be cataloged with care. Each deputy followed procedure, photographing, labeling, documenting, trying to impose order on something that resisted comprehension. Outside, a small crowd gathered at the edge of the property, murmuring in disbelief. The local coroner was summoned, and the scene was sealed off. The first responders, hardened by years of rural accidents and hunting mishaps, left the house visibly shaken. As the sun set behind the barren trees, the Gein farm became the epicenter of a case that would soon draw national attention, its details whispered in stunned tones across the Midwest. The investigation unfolded with methodical precision. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory was called in, bringing photographers, fingerprint experts, and evidence technicians who worked through the night under floodlights powered by a portable generator. Every item from the house was tagged and boxed, each photograph logged in sequence. Detectives interviewed neighbors who spoke of Gein's quiet manner, his solitary trips into town, and his deep attachment to his late mother. In the small Plainfield diner, conversations halted whenever lawmen entered, and speculation filled the silence that followed. Churches held prayer services for the missing store owner, while parents began escorting their children to school. Reporters from Milwaukee and Chicago arrived, their flashbulbs cutting through the gray November mornings. The sheriff's department, unaccustomed to such scrutiny, set up a temporary command post to manage the flow of information. Forensic analysts compared tool marks, studied soil samples, and tried to reconstruct the sequence of events inside the farmhouse. What emerged was a portrait not only of crime, but of psychological isolation. A man whose world had narrowed until reality itself seemed to bend inward. The community, bound by shared disbelief, waited for answers that could make sense of what investigators were uncovering piece by piece. As evidence accumulated, the case against Gein solidified. Psychiatrists were brought in to evaluate his mental state, conducting lengthy interviews under controlled conditions. Their findings suggested a complex mixture of grief, delusion, and fixation, rooted in years of extreme isolation and a distorted attachment to his mother's memory. The legal process moved slowly, complicated by questions of competency. Newspapers struggled to balance public curiosity with editorial restraint, often describing the case in careful, clinical terms. Law enforcement agencies from neighboring counties studied the evidence handling procedures, recognizing that this investigation would become a reference point for future forensic work in rural jurisdictions. In Plainfield, the hardware store reopened under new ownership, but few locals could walk past it without remembering the night the lights stayed off and the door remained locked. The town's sense of normalcy was fractured, replaced by a cautious awareness that even the most familiar face might conceal unimaginable secrets. Through it all, investigators maintained a quiet professionalism, determined to document every fact without surrendering to the horror those facts implied. Years later, the legacy of the Gein case endures not just in criminal history, but in psychology, law enforcement training, and popular culture. It became a study in how isolation, trauma, and untreated mental illness can converge in devastating ways. Forensic science advanced in its wake, emphasizing evidence preservation, interdisciplinary analysis, and the early involvement of mental health professionals. Plainfield eventually returned to its rhythms of farming and small-town life, though the memory lingers in the collective consciousness, a reminder of what was uncovered on that cold November evening. The case continues to prompt reflection on how communities perceive eccentricity, how grief can distort reality, and how investigators balance duty with empathy in the face of human darkness. For those who lived through it, the events of 1957 remain a dividing line between before and after. And for those who study it now, the story stands as both caution and lesson. That evil, when it appears, often wears the quietest face,